All right, let's get right into it. Have you ever actually stopped to think about how the world's most translated book gets, well, translated, step by meticulous step? In this explainer, we're unpacking the methodology of Dr. George Payton, a veteran translation consultant. And let me tell you, getting an ancient text, written thousands of years ago in Greek and Hebrew, into a modern local dialect without losing its soul, it is absolutely not as simple as just swapping out words using a dictionary. It is an intense, multi-layered gauntlet. So here's the roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the extremely high stakes of translation. Then, Phase 1, with the internal team. After that, we'll jump into Phase 2, which is all about external stress tests. And finally, we're going to explore an amazing technique called the front translation tool. Starting off with Section 1, the high stakes of translation, and getting the words exactly right. To really grasp why this whole process has to be so ridiculously rigorous, we need to understand the immense danger of a bad translation. Dr. Payton gives us this absolutely brilliant real-world example from the Swahili language. Think about this massive cultural pitfall for a second. In Swahili, you actually have two different words that can both translate to the English word story. Now, if a translation team just defaults to the Swahili word hadithi when talking about the story of Jesus or Abraham, local readers are going to automatically assume it is a fictional fairy tale. They'll literally think these people never existed. That is exactly why translators must deliberately use the word habari instead, because that implies factual news. You know, the kind of stuff you'd read in a newspaper or hear on TV? Just one single wrong word can completely derail the reader's entire understanding of the text. So avoiding those massive cultural misunderstandings means every single translation has to hit 4 non-negotiable qualities. It has to be accurate, obviously, meaning nothing is arbitrarily added, removed, or changed. It has to be natural. In Swahili, they use the word safi, which means clean, so the language should just sound beautiful and normal, not clunky. Third, it has to be clearly understood. If the core intent isn't communicated perfectly, the translator simply hasn't done their job. And finally, it needs to be accessible, meaning it actually resonates with the reader's own culture. Moving on to Phase 1, the internal team. This is the very first layer of the translation filter. The big question here is, how do we actually put those 4 qualities into practice? Well, the work starts entirely inside the translation office, completely behind closed doors. This internal assembly line kicks off with the translation team just sitting together, absorbing the original meaning of the text. They internalize it, and then they hammer out a first draft in their mother tongue. But they definitely don't stop there. Immediately, they put it through a stress test against a highly literal translation, maybe the English Standard Version, the NASB, or even directly against the original Greek and Hebrew if they have those skills. They're looking for one thing at this stage: strict accuracy. They have to know, did any crucial details accidentally get left on the cutting room floor? From there, the momentum really starts building. Once they've got a solid second draft, the team members actually trade their work. It's a peer review process. One person takes Chapter 1, someone else takes Chapter 2, and they swap. They're checking each other's work purely for naturalness and clarity. They ask themselves, hey, would I actually say it this way in everyday life? They continuously absorb this feedback, making revisions until they lock in a polished third draft. And yes, that is immediately followed by yet another accuracy check, just to make totally sure a previous edit didn't accidentally delete something vital. Next up is Phase 2, external stress tests, where we finally take the text to the community. You see, an internal draft is never enough. No matter how thoroughly the translation team checks their own work, the text still has to survive a brutal gauntlet of external stress tests, starting with the exact people it is actually meant for. So the translators take the draft out of the office and bring it to a really diverse mix of locals, young, old, married, single. But they don't just hand it over and ask, so did you like it? Instead, they read it aloud, and then they ask the listener to retell the story right back to them in their own words. It's this brilliant feedback loop designed to see if the actual meaning survived the translation. Did the listener miss the point? Did they invent a detail that wasn't even there? And right here is where it all turns into a numbers game. If roughly 70 to 80% of the community test group perfectly understands the passage, that is a huge win. It's considered a success. That remaining 20% or so of confusion, that probably just means the team needs to add a tiny explanatory footnote for some complex cultural concept. But if that comprehension rate drops down to a 50-50 split, well, that's hard data right there. It tells the team there is a deep, foundational problem. It means the text is completely failing the clearly understood test, and they have to send it straight back to the drawing board for a major rewrite. Okay, so once the community finally gives the green light on understandability, the text moves on to the consultant check. But here is the catch. These expert consultants very often do not speak the highly specific local dialect that's being translated. So how on earth do they check the work? Well, the local team creates what's called a back translation. They translate their shiny new text back into a widely known language, like Swahili or English, just so the outside expert can actually read it. And these senior consultants, they aren't just acting like strict English teachers looking for typos. They use that back translation to cross-reference the local team's work directly against the original ancient Greek and Hebrew texts. They apply years of intense linguistic wisdom to ensure absolute historical and theological fidelity to the source. The very last external filter is the reviewer's check. This is where the team brings in 10 to 20 local community leaders, pastors, and church elders to review massive chunks of the text, maybe even an entire book like Mark. They're verifying that the translation uses the familiar religious vocabulary the community already knows. But honestly, the bigger purpose here is securing community buy-in. Bringing these leaders into the fold turns the project from the translator's book into our community's book. All right, section 4, the front translation tool, and how to break down intimidating texts. Let's pull back the curtain on a really specific, highly effective technique here. Because staring at a blank page when you're supposed to be translating an ancient text, that can be absolutely terrifying for a new translator. That is exactly why they use a powerful stepping stone called a front translation. Think of a front translation essentially as a bridge. Technically, it's an intralingual tool, which is just a very fancy way of saying that if the translator is working from an English or Swahili Bible, the consultant will first write out a highly simplified version in that same language. This untangles all those ancient grammatical knots and structural nightmares before the local translator even touches it. It makes the entire process so much faster and way less daunting. And Paul's letters brilliantly illustrate why this is needed. The Apostle Paul is kind of famous for writing these absolutely epic sentences that just drag on for 10 solid verses. You literally cannot translate that directly into most modern spoken languages without completely losing your reader. Studies actually show that natural human speech happens in 10 to 15 word chunks. So the front translation takes Paul's massive run-on sentences and chops them down into bite-sized natural segments. But it goes beyond just fixing sentence length. The front translation also adjusts the grammar and clarifies implicit details. For instance, if the ancient text simply says, "they went down to the Jordan," a front translation is going to add the word river, so it reads, "the Jordan River," or "the town of Nazareth." You are absolutely not adding brand new information to the Bible here. You're just adding implied, clarifying information so the local translator isn't stuck guessing what the original author actually meant. It also very carefully isolates the specific emotional tone of a passage, which is vital. Take the book of Philippians. Paul writes with this incredibly warm, loving tone, saying things like, "I have you in my heart." But then over in Galatians, he issues a seriously sharp rebuke, like, "You foolish Galatians." Translators have to capture that tone perfectly. You really do not want to accidentally translate Paul's loving encouragement using the same aggressive, sharp vocabulary as his harsh rebukes. And after pushing through every single internal draft, every community test, front translation, and consultant check, this is the ultimate goal. The whole point is creating a text that is so painstakingly crafted, so undeniably natural, and so accurate that the local people read it and feel immediate ownership. They say, "This is our translation. This is our language." So the next time you pick up a translated text, you really have to ask yourself, how many rigorous filters, heated debates, and community stress tests did those exact words have to survive just to make it onto your page? Thanks for hanging out with us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.